On the morning of December 3, 1941, in a nondescript building in Washington, D.C., cryptanalyst Agnes Meyer Driscoll stood before a breakthrough that should have terrified her. The Japanese Navy had just implemented their new cipher system, and American intelligence interceptors were suddenly receiving clear confirmation messages across multiple frequencies. The Japanese appeared to be celebrating a cryptographic victory, confident they had finally created an unbreakable code. What they did not know was that for the past 4 months, every single message they transmitted had been read, analyzed, and filed away by American codebreakers who had cracked their system before it even went fully operational. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how overconfidence in cryptographic security, combined with systematic American ingenuity, created one of the most devastating intelligence advantages in modern warfare, transforming the entire strategic landscape of the Pacific conflict before the first major engagement even began. Agnes Meyer Driscoll, known throughout American naval intelligence as Madam X, had spent 23 years breaking codes that others deemed impossible. She stood 5 feet 2 inches tall, wore her graying hair in a tight bun, and possessed a mathematical mind that could detect patterns in seemingly random sequences of numbers with an accuracy that bordered on the supernatural. On that December morning, she reviewed intercepts from Station Hypo in Hawaii, Station Cast in the Philippines, and Station Affirm in Bainbridge Island, all confirming the same remarkable situation. The Japanese believed they had achieved cryptographic invincibility, while American intelligence had been reading their mail for 117 days. The story had begun the previous summer, when Japanese naval attachés in Berlin received detailed briefings on German cipher machine technology. Impressed by the complexity of electromechanical encryption, the Imperial Japanese Navy commissioned a similar device, convinced that mechanical encryption represented an insurmountable challenge to enemy codebreakers. What they failed to understand was that Agnes Driscoll had been studying captured cipher machines since 1932, and that her team had developed mathematical techniques specifically designed to attack electromechanical encryption systems. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort, head of Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor, received the first intercepts of the new Japanese system on August 7, 1941. He immediately recognized the signature characteristics of a rotor-based cipher machine. Within 72 hours, his team had identified the machine's logical structure. Within 2 weeks, they had recovered the initial rotor settings. By September 1st, they were reading current Japanese naval communications with a delay of less than 6 hours from interception to translation. The Japanese, meanwhile, conducted their security tests with fatal flaws in methodology. They transmitted test messages, received confirmation of successful encryption, and concluded that their system was secure. What they never tested was whether an adversary with sufficient mathematical capability and resources could break the system given enough intercepted traffic. They assumed complexity equaled security, a mistake that would cost them dearly in the coming conflict. Captain Kanji Ogawa, Chief of Communications Security for the Imperial Japanese Navy, wrote a confident memo on September 15th, stating that the new cipher system provided absolute protection for operational messages. He based this conclusion on the astronomical number of possible key combinations, approximately 158 million different settings. What he did not account for was that American cryptanalysts did not need to test every possible combination. They needed only to understand the mathematical principles underlying the system, and Agnes Driscoll understood those principles better than the engineers who had built the machine. The American advantage extended beyond pure code-breaking capability. The United States had established a comprehensive signals intelligence network spanning the Pacific, with listening stations in Hawaii, the Philippines, Guam, and along the West Coast. These stations intercepted thousands of Japanese messages daily, providing the volume of traffic necessary for effective cryptanalysis. The Japanese, by contrast, had assumed that physical distance and radio propagation limitations would prevent systematic interception of their communications. They were wrong. Frank Raven, a young mathematician working under Driscoll's direction, later described the experience of reading Japanese naval communications in real time as surreal. He recalled sitting in the basement of the Navy Department building, translating a message from the Japanese Naval Ministry to their fleet commanders, knowing that the intended recipients would not decode the message for another 4 hours due to time zone differences. The Americans were reading Japanese orders before Japanese admirals did. The intelligence hall was staggering in its breadth and depth. American analysts read messages about ship movements, supply requirements, personnel transfers, training schedules, and strategic discussions. They learned which vessels were in port for maintenance, which submarines were departing on patrol, which air groups were receiving new aircraft. They discovered the Japanese Navy's fuel consumption rates, their ammunition expenditure, their spare parts inventories. Most critically, they intercepted messages revealing strategic intentions and operational planning for future campaigns. In late October, Station Cast in the Philippines intercepted a series of messages discussing increased reconnaissance flights over American facilities in Hawaii and the Philippines. The messages requested detailed photographic analysis of anchorages, airfields, and harbor defenses. American intelligence officers noted the unusual interest in specific tactical details: water depths in Pearl Harbor, berthing arrangements for capital ships, locations of fuel storage facilities. The pattern suggested planning for a major operation, though the specific nature remained unclear. Agnes Driscoll assigned additional linguists to prioritize any traffic related to Hawaii or the Philippines. By mid-November, her team had identified code words appearing with increasing frequency, references to climbing Mount Nitaka, discussions of timing related to diplomatic negotiations, mentions of a special attack force conducting intensive training exercises. The messages indicated something significant was being prepared, though operational security meant that explicit details were transmitted through channels even more secure than the cipher system the Americans had broken. On November 25th, Station Hypo intercepted a message that caused considerable alarm among American intelligence officers. The message, addressed to multiple fleet commanders, referenced final preparations for operations beginning in early December. It mentioned positioning of submarines, coordination of air groups, and emphasis on achieving complete surprise. The message did not specify targets, but the geographic references and timing made clear that major action was imminent. Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, intelligence officer for the Pacific Fleet, brought the intercepts to Admiral Husband Kimmel, commander of the Pacific Fleet in Hawaii. Layton reported that Japanese military preparations indicated a high probability of operations beginning within 2 weeks, potentially directed at American or British territories in the Pacific. The specific nature and targets remained uncertain, but the volume and urgency of Japanese communications suggested something unprecedented in scale. What American intelligence did not fully grasp was that the Japanese were operating multiple communication systems simultaneously. The cipher machine that Driscoll's team had broken carried administrative and logistical traffic, the routine operations of a naval force. For truly sensitive operational plans, Japanese planners used different channels, including hand-delivered documents, one-time cipher pads, and strict radio silence for units involved in special operations. The Americans were reading the Japanese Navy's everyday business, but not its most closely guarded secrets. This limitation became tragically apparent on December 7th. While American cryptanalysts could track the movement of Japanese submarine forces, the positioning of fleet elements, and the general increase in military readiness, they did not intercept the specific attack plan for Pearl Harbor because those orders had never been transmitted by radio. The strike force had sailed under complete radio silence, communicating only through prearranged signals and avoiding any transmission that might reveal their presence. The attack on Pearl Harbor came as a tactical surprise, despite the strategic warning provided by signals intelligence. American forces in Hawaii were aware that tensions with Japan had reached a critical point, knew that Japanese forces were on high alert, and understood that military action was likely. But they did not know where or precisely when the blow would fall. The failure was not in code-breaking. Agnes Driscoll's team had functioned brilliantly, but in the limits of even the most sophisticated intelligence gathering, when an adversary maintains perfect operational security for their most critical operation. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, however, the value of the broken Japanese cipher system became immeasurably important. Within hours of the strike on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces launched operations across the Pacific, against the Philippines, Wake Island, Guam, Hong Kong, Malaya, and Thailand. But unlike the Pearl Harbor attack, many of these subsequent operations required ongoing radio communication for coordination, and every message transmitted was read by American cryptanalysts who now worked around the clock in a desperate effort to provide tactical intelligence to commanders facing overwhelming Japanese superiority in forces. Agnes Driscoll's basement operation expanded dramatically in the weeks following December 7th. Additional mathematicians, linguists, and clerical staff were recruited and rushed through security clearances. The number of daily intercepted messages increased from hundreds to thousands, as Japanese forces conducted operations across a theater spanning 10,000 miles. The cryptanalysts worked in rotating shifts, sleeping on cots in adjacent rooms, surviving on coffee and determination. The intelligence they provided proved crucial in the grim early months of the conflict. When Japanese forces moved to capture Wake Island, American codebreakers read the operation orders and provided defending Marines with advance warning of the assault schedule and approximate enemy strength. While Wake eventually fell after heroic resistance, the garrison's knowledge of Japanese intentions allowed them to inflict unexpected casualties and delay the operation, disrupting the enemy's timetable. In the Philippines, General Douglas MacArthur's intelligence officers received daily reports based on decrypted Japanese communications. They learned which enemy units were moving to which locations, when airstrikes were being planned, where Japanese forces intended to establish their next beachhead. This intelligence could not prevent the eventual fall of the Philippines. The Japanese committed overwhelming force to the campaign, but it allowed American and Filipino forces to conduct a more effective defense and prolonged the campaign far beyond Japanese expectations. Captain Joseph Redman, Director of Naval Communications in Washington, later calculated that signals intelligence provided by Station Hypo, Station Cast, and other intercept sites effectively multiplied American combat capability by a factor of 3 during the first 6 months of the conflict. A force that was outnumbered and outgunned could position itself advantageously, concentrate forces at critical points, and avoid enemy strength when operating with perfect intelligence on adversary movements and intentions. The Japanese, remarkably, remained confident in their cipher security throughout this period. They continued to transmit operational messages using the same system that American cryptanalysts had broken in August. Japanese communications security officers conducted periodic reviews and concluded repeatedly that their cipher remained secure. They noticed that American forces sometimes seemed to anticipate Japanese movements, but they attributed this to reconnaissance aircraft, submarine sightings, or security breaches by spies in port cities. The possibility that their cipher system itself had been compromised never seemed to seriously occur to them. This overconfidence reached almost absurd levels in March 1942, when the Japanese Navy transmitted detailed plans for their upcoming operation to capture Port Moresby in New Guinea and establish air bases that would threaten Australia. The messages included force composition, sailing schedules, and the intended route of approach. American intelligence officers read these plans as they were being transmitted to Japanese commanders and immediately began positioning forces to intercept the enemy fleet. The resulting engagement in the Coral Sea in early May became the first naval confrontation in history, where the opposing fleets never sighted each other directly, fighting entirely with carrier aircraft. More significantly, it was the first major operation where one side entered the encounter with complete knowledge of the enemy's intentions, having read their operation plan weeks in advance. While the tactical outcome was roughly even, strategically the operation succeeded in preventing the Japanese from capturing Port Moresby, stopping their advance toward Australia. Even more dramatic was the intelligence leading to the encounter off Midway Island in early June. Japanese planners conceived an elaborate operation to lure the American carrier fleet into a trap and destroy it decisively. They transmitted thousands of messages coordinating the movement of transport ships, escort vessels, carrier groups, and supporting elements across the Pacific. and American cryptanalysts read every single message. Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team at Station Hypo worked with desperate intensity to provide Admiral Chester Nimitz with a complete picture of Japanese intentions. They identified the target, Midway Island. They determined the timing, early June. They calculated the force composition: 4 fleet carriers, 2 light carriers, 7 battleships, and extensive supporting vessels. Most remarkably, they provided Nimitz with the Japanese operational plan itself, including the intended approach routes, the schedule for airstrikes, and the position where Japanese commanders expected to intercept the American fleet. Admiral Nimitz used this intelligence to position his carriers in exactly the right location to ambush the Japanese fleet. When Japanese forces arrived at Midway on June 4th, they encountered American carriers waiting in precisely the position that would provide maximum tactical advantage. The resulting engagement destroyed 4 Japanese fleet carriers, killed hundreds of experienced pilots, and fundamentally shifted the strategic balance in the Pacific. Japan would never again possess the offensive capability it had enjoyed in the conflict's opening months. Even after this devastating defeat, Japanese naval communications officers did not suspect that their cipher system had been compromised. They investigated whether spies had revealed the Midway operation plan. They questioned whether reconnaissance aircraft had detected their fleet. They reviewed their communications procedures, but they concluded that the cipher machine itself remained secure and they continued using it for operational traffic. This pattern continued throughout 1942 and into 1943. American intelligence read Japanese messages describing operational plans, supply movements, and strategic intentions. American commanders used this intelligence to position submarines along enemy shipping routes, to ambush Japanese convoys, to concentrate forces at critical points. The cumulative effect was devastating to Japanese logistics and operational capability. In April 1943, American codebreakers intercepted messages revealing the travel schedule of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the Pearl Harbor operation and commander of the Japanese combined fleet. The messages specified his departure time, route, and arrival schedule for an inspection tour of forward bases in the Solomon Islands. American commanders faced a difficult decision: whether to use this intelligence to target Yamamoto personally, knowing that doing so might reveal the extent of American code-breaking capabilities. After consultation with the highest levels of American military leadership, the decision was made to proceed. On April 18th, American fighters intercepted Yamamoto's transport aircraft exactly as scheduled and shot it down over Bougainville. The Japanese lost their most capable naval commander and a symbol of their early successes. Japanese security officers investigated whether the interception was coincidental, the result of a chance sighting, or indicated a deeper intelligence breach. Remarkably, they again concluded that their cipher security remained intact. By mid-1943, the cumulative impact of American signals intelligence had become strategically decisive. Japanese submarine forces operated according to patrol patterns that American intelligence read in advance, allowing convoys to be routed around them. Japanese resupply convoys sailed on schedules that American commanders knew weeks ahead of time, enabling submarine ambushes that devastated enemy logistics. Japanese airstrikes were anticipated and met by prepared defenses that inflicted crippling losses. The systematic exploitation of this intelligence advantage transformed the nature of operations across the Pacific theater. American planners could allocate their limited resources with precision, knowing exactly where Japanese strength would be concentrated and where vulnerabilities existed. This allowed smaller American forces to achieve results disproportionate to their numerical strength, compensating for the material advantages Japan had gained in the conflict's opening months. Agnes Meyer Driscoll, by this point promoted to a senior position within naval intelligence, supervised a cryptanalytic organization that had grown from a handful of specialists to over 700 personnel. They processed tens of thousands of intercepted messages monthly, providing intelligence that shaped operations across the Pacific theater. Her contributions to the conflict effort were classified at the highest levels. Even most military commanders did not know the source of the remarkably accurate intelligence they received, The Japanese eventually did modify their cipher systems in mid-1943, introducing new machines and procedures. But by that point, American cryptanalysts had gained such deep understanding of Japanese cryptographic thinking that they broke the new systems with relative speed. The pattern continued. Japanese confidence in their cipher security, combined with American mathematical expertise, created an intelligence advantage that persisted throughout the conflict. In late 1944, as American forces advanced across the Pacific, Japanese naval communications increasingly revealed desperation. Messages discussed fuel shortages, ammunition exhaustion, lack of replacement pilots, and crumbling defensive positions. American intelligence officers read these reports of declining Japanese capability and provided commanders with accurate assessments of enemy weakness, enabling bold operations that accelerated the advance toward Japan itself. The full extent of American cryptanalytic success remained classified for decades after the conflict ended. Agnes Meyer Driscoll retired from naval service in 1949 without public recognition of her contributions. Joseph Rochefort, whose work at Station Hypo had been instrumental in the victory at Midway, left the Navy feeling that his efforts had never received appropriate acknowledgement. The thousands of cryptanalysts, linguists, and support personnel who had worked in the signals intelligence effort returned to civilian life, carrying secrets they could not share. Not until the mid-1970s did the United States government begin declassifying documents related to the cryptanalytic effort during the global conflict. Historians finally gained access to records showing the extraordinary scope of American signals intelligence and its decisive impact on operations throughout the Pacific. Agnes Driscoll, by then elderly and largely forgotten, received belated recognition as one of the most important cryptanalysts in American history. Her breakthrough work on Japanese cipher systems, combined with the organizational structure she helped create, had provided American commanders with an intelligence advantage unlike anything previously achieved in warfare. The irony that began this story, Japanese celebration of their cryptographic security, while American codebreakers rid every message, persisted throughout the conflict. Japanese confidence in their cipher systems prevented them from recognizing the catastrophic security breach that undermined every operation they conducted. They attributed American tactical successes to superior resources, better reconnaissance, or fortunate timing. The possibility that their most sensitive communications were being read in real time by enemy cryptanalysts seemed too improbable to seriously consider. This cognitive blindness cost Japan dearly. Operations planned in Tokyo were known in Washington before Japanese field commanders received their orders. Ship movements ordered by naval headquarters were tracked by American intelligence before the vessels left port. Strategic discussions among Japanese military leaders were read by American analysts and briefed to American commanders. The cumulative effect transformed what might have been a far longer and more costly conflict into one where American forces operated with a decisive informational advantage from the aftermath of Pearl Harbor through the final surrender in August 1945. The story stands as perhaps the most significant intelligence achievement in modern history, a sustained cryptanalytic success that shaped the outcome of the largest conflict ever fought. It demonstrated that mathematical expertise, systematic organization, and sustained analytical effort could penetrate even the most sophisticated cipher systems. It proved that overconfidence in technological security, combined with failure to seriously test one's own systems against competent adversaries, could lead to catastrophic intelligence failures. And it showed that information itself, when properly exploited, could serve as a force multiplier equal to or greater than superiority in conventional military capabilities. Agnes Meyer Driscoll passed away in 1971 at the age of 89, having lived long enough to see her work partially declassified and acknowledged. In her final years, she gave a handful of interviews to military historians, providing insights into the cryptanalytic effort that had helped win the Pacific conflict. When asked about her feelings regarding the Japanese overconfidence in their cipher security, she responded with characteristic understatement that confidence without rigorous testing was simply another form of vulnerability. and that assuming one's security measures were sufficient, merely because they seemed complex, had been a mistake made by many nations throughout history. The lesson resonates beyond its specific historical context. In any contest where information provides advantage, the side that most accurately assesses its own vulnerabilities while exploiting those of the adversary holds a decisive edge. The Japanese celebrated their unbreakable codes, while Americans quietly read every message. And that disparity between perception and reality helped determine the outcome of the largest conflict ever fought across the Pacific Ocean. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.